The air was still over Lake Greenwood that morning. Mist curled across the water, catching the soft glow of sunrise. Birds dipped low, their wings scattering ripples across the surface. It was the kind of morning where silence itself felt sacred. Marcus Reed, a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s, lowered the outboard motor of his boat into the lake with practiced ease. He had grown up around water, and mornings like this weren't a hobby, they were therapy. The calm before the storm of the day. But the storm arrived early. The crunch of gravel from the nearby path broke the stillness. He didn't look up at first, too focused on securing his tackle box, but the sharp voice that followed made his jaw tighten. "Excuse me. You can't park that thing here." Marcus turned slowly. Standing at the edge of the pier was a woman in a tailored navy blazer, her blonde hair sprayed into stiff perfection. She clutched a clipboard like it was a weapon. Her name was Linda Whitaker, though everyone in the community already knew her by reputation. She wasn't just any resident, she was the president of the Homeowners Association. And she wore the title like a crown. "That boat is not allowed here," she snapped, pointing as though Marcus hadn't noticed what he had just lowered into the water. "This is private property. HOA rules. You need to move it immediately." Marcus didn't flinch. He rested his hands on the side of his boat, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Morning to you too," he said evenly. Linda huffed. "Don't play games. You're trespassing. Boats must be registered, approved, and stored in designated slips, none of which apply to you. I don't know how you even got past the gate, but this." She motioned dramatically to his boat. "This isn't happening." From behind her, two more HOA members approached, both middle-aged men in polos who looked more like they'd been dragged out of a golf course than belonged near a lake. They flanked her, nodding along as if her word was gospel. "Linda, should we call security?" one of them asked. Neighbors had begun to gather too, some stepping out onto their decks, others pulling out their phones. Confrontations involving Linda were practically neighborhood theater. Marcus stayed calm, his expression unreadable. He could feel every eye on him, waiting for him to react, waiting for him to argue, to raise his voice, to play the part Linda had already written for him. But Marcus knew something Linda didn't. Something no one here seemed to realize. The lake didn't belong to the HOA. It belonged to him. Linda Whitaker wasn't used to being ignored. She tapped her clipboard against her thigh with growing irritation, heels clicking against the wooden dock as she marched closer to Marcus. "Sir, I don't think you understand," she said, her voice sharp enough to slice through the morning air. "You can't just pull up here and dump your boat like some weekend tourist. This is a regulated lake, and the HOA doesn't tolerate rule breakers." Marcus leaned against the railing, unfazed. "Didn't see any signs." Her eyes narrowed. "That's because people here already know the rules. It's called community standards. Clearly, you're not from here." A murmur rippled through the small crowd gathering near the shoreline. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded in agreement with Linda, others whispered under their breath. Phones tilted higher, recording. One teenager whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Bet he doesn't even live here." Linda smirked, emboldened by the support. "Exactly. Which is why I'm going to give you two choices. Remove that boat immediately, or I'll have our security and the sheriff's office handle this. And trust me, they don't take kindly to trespassers." The two men behind her folded their arms, puffing themselves up like backup dancers in her performance. Still, Marcus didn't move. He crouched down to adjust the motor, calm, deliberate, as if she hadn't spoken at all. Linda's face flushed. "Don't ignore me. Do you have any idea who I am?" Marcus finally looked up, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. "I think I've got the gist." Something in his tone made her falter, just for a second. But she pressed on, her pride too heavy to let go. "Fine. Have it your way," she snapped. She scribbled something furiously on her clipboard, tore off the sheet, and slapped it onto his boat. "That's an official violation notice. You'll be fined $500, payable to the HOA office. And if it's not cleared in 48 hours, your boat will be impounded. End of story. A few gasps came from the onlookers. Some neighbors laughed nervously. The audacity was nothing new for Linda, but her boldness always had a way of stunning people. Marcus straightened slowly, the paper fluttering off his boat into the water. He didn't even glance at it as it sank. "Looks like you dropped something," he said evenly. The crowd chuckled. Linda's cheeks flushed crimson. "You think this is funny?" she hissed. "You won't be laughing when we shut down your little fishing trip and tow that heap of junk away. We control this lake, not you. You're about to learn how things work around here." Marcus held her gaze silent. That silence carried more weight than any argument could. Somewhere in the crowd, an older man muttered, "I've never seen him before, but he sure doesn't look worried." Another neighbor whispered, "Yeah, it's almost like he knows something." Linda didn't notice. She was too busy basking in her imagined victory, too certain that her clipboard and authority meant something more than paper and ego. She didn't know the storm she was about to unleash. Because Marcus Reed wasn't a guest here. He wasn't a trespasser. And the HOA didn't control the lake. He did. For a moment, silence hung in the air. The paper violation notice floated further out on the rippling water, the only sound the gentle hum of Marcus's motor as it idled. Neighbors shifted uneasily. Some lowered their phones, others leaned in closer. Even the birds seemed to have gone quiet. Marcus exhaled, slow and steady. "You keep talking about rules," he said finally, his deep voice carrying across the dock. "About control. About who belongs here. Maybe it's time you learned who actually makes the rules." Linda scoffed, though her laugh trembled just slightly. "Please. Spare me the lecture. You're wasting everyone's time. Pack up your boat and go before I make the call." Marcus reached calmly into the leather satchel resting in his boat. He pulled out a worn folder, edges frayed from years of handling, and laid it gently across the dock railing. He opened it with deliberate care, as if the papers inside weren't just documents, but weapons. The crowd leaned in. He tapped the page with his finger. "Lake Greenwood. Purchased outright in 2009. Deed registered in my name. Which means—" He looked up, his eyes locking onto Linda's with a quiet, dangerous calm. "This lake doesn't belong to your HOA. It belongs to me." Gasps erupted. Several phones zoomed in on the paper. The two HOA men behind Linda exchanged nervous glances. Linda blinked rapidly, her face draining of color. That's impossible. The HOA owns this lake. Everyone knows that." Marcus tilted his head, his gaze unflinching. "Everyone knows wrong. Your HOA bylaws might govern the lawns, the mailboxes, the holiday decorations. But the water?" He tapped the page again. "That's mine." Whispers rippled like wildfire. One neighbor muttered, "He owns the lake?" Another whispered, "That means all the fishing permits, the club, everything." Marcus nodded slowly, confirming their fears. "Your fishing club? Every boat slip? Every regulation you've been enforcing out here for years? None of it was yours to enforce." He leaned forward just slightly. "You've been trespassing on my property." The words hit like a hammer. Linda's mouth opened and closed, no sound escaping. For the first time in her tenure as HOA president, she looked small. Marcus wasn't finished. He closed the folder and tucked it neatly away. Then he stood, tall and unshakable, his voice steady but cold. "So here's how this is going to work. Effective immediately, your fishing club is evicted. Any permits you handed out? Invalid. Any fines you collected?" He paused, letting the silence build. "Consider them stolen money. And I don't take kindly to theft." The crowd erupted again, some in laughter, some in disbelief. A teenager yelled, "No way! He really owns it." A man in the back muttered, "Linda's done for." Linda stumbled backward, shaking her head furiously. You can't do this. You can't just." Marcus stepped off his boat and onto the dock, closing the distance between them. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. I already did. And the county will be very interested to know how long your board has been pretending otherwise. Phones caught every second, Linda's face pale, the sweat forming at her temple, the way she clutched her clipboard like a shield that no longer worked. One of the men beside her whispered harshly, "Linda, he's telling the truth. I've seen those records before. He really does own it." Her knees seemed to weaken. The neighbors weren't silent anymore. They muttered openly now, some glaring at her, others laughing. Her authority, once unshakable, crumbled right there on the dock. And Marcus? He didn't gloat. He didn't raise his hands in triumph. He simply turned back to his boat, adjusting his motor again as if the entire confrontation had been nothing more than a distraction. But before he pushed off, he looked over his shoulder one last time. His eyes found Linda's, and in that quiet, steady way, he delivered the final blow. "You wanted me gone. Now it's your turn to leave my water." Then he pushed away from the dock, the engine humming softly as his boat drifted out into the misty lake. The crowd watched in stunned silence, every eye following him until he disappeared into the morning fog. Behind him, Linda Whitaker stood frozen, her clipboard useless in her hands. For the first time, she had no words. And in that silence, the neighborhood learned a truth they would never forget: power isn't always loud. Sometimes, the quietest man on the dock is the one who owns the water beneath your feet.